There's a question almost nobody asks when they see someone spending money. And honestly, it might be the most interesting question of all. It's not, how much do they make? And it's not, are they spending too much? The real question is different. What is this person trying to prove, avoid, or hide through the money they earn and spend? And when you start looking at money through that lens, something very strange happens. You realize that someone making $1,000 a month and someone making $1 million a month can actually be trapped in the exact same game. Because at the end of the day, making more money doesn't always change the relationship someone has with it. A lot of the time, it just changes the setting where that relationship plays out. Anxiety, fear, and comparison are still there. They're just wearing different clothes now. And that's exactly why I want to show you something today. I want to take you through four completely different income levels: $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, and $1 million a month. So you can see how people's relationship with money changes at each one, not just in how much they can spend, but in how they spend it and in the kind of life that level of income makes them want to build, protect, or prove. Looking at these four levels side by side makes you realize that the difference between them goes far beyond a bank balance. My name is Ben, and if this kind of topic interests you, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because here we don't just talk about money, we talk about the behavior, the logic, and the patterns that shape people's financial lives, even when they don't realize it. Let's get into it. There's a reason $100 can feel completely different depending on who's holding it. Not because the bill itself changes, it doesn't. It's still the same $100, same size, same value, same number printed on the front. But the moment that money lands in someone's hands, its job changes completely. And that's where this conversation starts to get interesting. Because most people think the difference between someone who earns very little and someone who earns a lot is simply how much money is coming in. One person earns less, another earns more. End of story. But that's not the most revealing part. The more interesting question is this: what is that money being asked to do? Because the way someone spends money often tells you much more about the financial world they live in than their salary alone ever could. Two people can have money in the bank and still be living in completely different financial realities. The same $100 can mean relief in one life and be almost invisible in another. In one situation, it changes the entire week. In another, it barely makes a difference. And that's exactly why this video matters. Because this isn't really a video about who has more money and who has less. It's not a comparison between rich and poor. And it's definitely not one of those videos that just throws a bunch of income levels on the screen and acts like that explains everything. What really matters is the function of money, what role it plays, what kind of pressure it's trying to relieve, what problem it's being sent out to solve the moment it leaves someone's account. That's the part most people never stop to think about. When you look at spending from the outside, it's easy to focus on the obvious things: the apartment, the car, the groceries, the clothes, the trips, the upgrades. But those things by themselves don't tell the full story. Because money doesn't mean the same thing at every wealth level. And once you really see that, a lot of strange financial behavior starts to make a lot more sense. You begin to realize that people can spend money in ways that seem irrational from the outside, while still making perfect sense inside the reality they're living in. Someone earning $1,000 a month might view money as emergency oxygen. Someone earning $10,000 might use it to send a message. Someone earning $100,000 might spend it to make daily life easier. And someone at the $1 million level might use it to access things most people don't even imagine can be bought. That is why I don't want you to watch this video as if it were merely a list of income brackets. I want you to watch it as if you're stepping into four completely different financial worlds. Because that's exactly what they are. Same country, same currency, but a completely different job for every dollar, depending on the level. And if you've never looked at money this way before, this video will probably change the way you think about your own spending. Because once you stop asking, how much money does this person have, and start asking, what is their money trying to do for them, everything becomes a whole lot more revealing. And before we even get into the four levels, there's one thing you need to understand first. As income rises, money doesn't just buy different things, it starts solving different fears. And that's where this topic starts to get really fascinating. Once you stop looking at money as simply more or less, something much more interesting comes into focus. At every wealth level, money is trying to solve a different kind of discomfort. That's the real shift. What changes from one level to the next isn't just lifestyle. It isn't just the size of the apartment, the kind of car parked in the driveway, or how expensive the vacations look on Instagram. What really changes is the pressure behind the money, the tension, the thing money is being asked to solve. At the lowest level, money is usually being used to put out fires. And I'm not talking about metaphorical fires. I'm talking about real ones. The kind that show up as overdue bills, basic grocery runs, transportation problems, or one unexpected expense big enough to throw the entire month off balance. Then income rises and something changes. Money stops being used only to keep life from falling apart and starts being used to build identity. Now it's no longer just about making it to the end of the month. It becomes about what your spending says about you. Then income rises again, and the role of money changes once more. Now it starts buying less friction and less inconvenience. And eventually, at the highest level, money starts opening doors most people didn't even know existed. That's why I want you to pay attention to what's happening here, because these aren't just four different income levels. There are four different relationships with money, four different emotional environments, four different answers to the same question. What is money supposed to protect me from at this stage of my life? That's the lens that makes the rest of this video make sense. Because if you don't see that, the levels start to feel random, and everything starts to look like just a list of upgrades, but that's not what this is. This is a map of how the function of money changes as the pressures of life change too. And nowhere is this more evident than at the very first level. Because when someone is living on $1,000 a month, money isn't about building a future. It's about keeping the present from collapsing. At the $1,000 level, the money isn't being used to build anything. It isn't being used to invest. It isn't being used to create freedom. And it definitely isn't being used to enjoy life. At this level, money has a much simpler job. It's there to keep the month alive. That's it. It goes toward the portion of rent the person is trying to cover. And in many cases, that doesn't mean having an entire apartment to themselves. It might mean renting a room in someone else's house, living with roommates, living with parents, and contributing to household expenses. It goes toward basic groceries, a phone bill, transportation, because owning a car usually isn't realistic here, medication, a copay, a small emergency, a minimum debt payment, a bill that's already overdue, laundry, toiletries, basic household essentials. That's what money is doing at this level. It's not expanding life. It's simply trying to keep life standing. And the hardest part is that there's no room for error. That's what makes this level so heavy. There's no cushion, no margin, no real ability to absorb a surprise without feeling it immediately. One small thing goes wrong, and the entire month changes. A prescription costs more than expected. The electric bill comes in higher than usual. Work hours get cut. A doctor visit shows up out of nowhere. Someone has a birthday. A social event comes up that you feel like you can't say no to. At this level, almost no purchase is about pleasure. It's about interrupting a bigger problem. That's the logic behind almost everything. Someone at this level doesn't buy the cheapest option because they're trying to be financially disciplined. They buy the cheapest option because if they make the wrong choice, something else doesn't get paid. That's a completely different relationship with money. And once you understand that, the entire level starts to feel different. You stop looking at it as bad spending, and you start seeing it for what it really is: constant financial triage. That is why $1,000 does not generate progress. It simply keeps the month from falling apart. It buys time until the next bill, the next paycheck, or the next problem shows up. And when money is being used that way, there's almost nothing left for the future. There's no real room to save, invest, or even think long-term. Because when the present feels fragile, the future becomes something you can't afford to think about. But the moment income rises, something interesting happens. Money stops being used only to survive and starts being used to send a message. Think about it this way. At the $10,000 level, money is generally no longer used primarily for survival. It's no longer just trying to keep the month from falling apart. Now it starts doing something much more psychological. It starts helping someone shape what their life looks like, and more importantly, how that life makes them feel. Because once survival is no longer the main concern, a different kind of question starts to appear. No longer, can I make it through this month? But something closer to, what should my life look like now that I've made it this far? And that's where the function of money starts to change. At this level, money starts being used to look successful, to feel different from the person you used to be, to signal progress, to prove both to yourself and to other people that things are working. And that's why the spending starts to look different. The car is no longer just about transportation. Now it might be a nicer car than necessary. Not because the old one stopped working, but because this one feels more aligned with the version of life you believe you've earned. The apartment is no longer just a place to sleep. Now the location matters more. The building matters more. The image of that place matters more. Clothes start doing more than simply covering your body. Now they begin to help shape how you're perceived. A watch, a more polished wardrobe, a premium gym, more attention to appearance, more frequent tech upgrades, short trips, nicer dinners, visible lifestyle upgrades that, in one way or another, say, I'm doing well now. And the important thing to understand is that this doesn't automatically make someone shallow. That would be far too simplistic. Because most of the time, what's really happening is something much more human than that. For the first time, this person has reached a level where they no longer want to simply survive their own life. They want to feel like they've genuinely moved up within it, and they want proof of that. They want something visible, something tangible, something that makes that progress feel real. That's why at this level, money often stops asking, "What do I need?" and starts asking, "What does this say about me?" That's the real shift. At the $10,000 level, the money begins to be used to project a more refined and successful version of yourself. But it doesn't stop there. Once income climbs high enough, the game changes again. Money stops being used to prove you've made it and starts being used to remove friction from your life before you even feel it. In practice, it works like this. Someone who reaches the $100,000 level begins to understand that money becomes less visible, less performative, less concerned with sending a message, and much more functional. Because at that point, money often stops asking, "How do I look?" and starts asking, "How do I make life easier?" That's the shift. At this level, money starts being spent less to impress people and more to take weight off everyday life. The apartment or house gets better, but not mainly because of status. Now it's about peace, safety, space, a quieter neighborhood, a better school district, a home that's easier to live in, not just nicer to show. The car changes too, not because it needs to turn heads, but because it needs to be comfortable, reliable, practical. Something that starts every morning without drama and doesn't require extra mental energy. And that same logic starts showing up everywhere. Money starts being used to save time, to reduce the number of small things that keep draining your attention. Now it's delivery without guilt. A house cleaner a few times a month, someone to help with the yard, babysitting, flights that make travel less exhausting, hotels that make the experience smoother, better access to healthcare, better systems, better logistics, more things that quietly reduce the amount of effort daily life requires. And the important part is that at this level, these purchases often don't look dramatic from the outside. They don't always look flashy, but they change something that matters a lot. They reduce the recovery time from small problems. A stressful week becomes easier to handle. A busy month feels less chaotic. A broken appliance is annoying, but it doesn't throw everything off. A last-minute inconvenience doesn't send the whole household into crisis. That's why $100,000 starts to feel so different. Because at this level, money starts buying smoother days, less time dealing with problems that used to consume hours of your life. And that's a very different relationship with money from the one we saw at $10,000. At $10,000, money was still asking, "What does this say about me?" At $100,000, it starts asking, "What can I remove from my life so everything works better?" That's the maturity of this level. Money isn't trying to prove anything. It's trying to remove the little points of friction that make life feel heavier than it needs to. And then you reach the level where money stops buying comfort and starts buying things most people didn't even know could be bought. The $1 million level is where money starts doing something surprising. It allows you to buy a different experience of reality. And that's the real shift. Because at this level, the goal usually is no longer to own a bigger version of what everyone else already wants. What money really starts buying here is access, privacy, speed, priority, customization. It starts buying distance from the parts of life that most people still have to absorb for themselves. Distance from bureaucracy, distance from waiting, distance from stress, distance from inconvenience, distance from uncertainty. That's why the spending starts to look so different. Travel is no longer just about getting from one place to another. Now it might mean first class, private terminals, airport lounges, a way of flying with less chaos, less friction, and fewer people. Healthcare changes too, not necessarily because the treatment itself is different, but because access is faster. Appointments happen sooner. The process is smoother. The problem gets handled before it has time to grow into something truly disruptive. And the same thing happens with time. Now there may be assistants, concierge services, people who plan, people who coordinate, people who remove complexity before it ever reaches you. With $1 million in your bank account, the ways you invest are different because now access expands. Different opportunities, different environments, different introductions, different advisors, private structures for taxes, legal protection, estate planning, and wealth management. Not because it looks glamorous from the outside, but because once money reaches this level, the goal often stops being simply acquiring more and becomes protecting, organizing, and moving through life with as little friction as possible. And maybe the strangest part of all is that many of these expenses don't even feel like spending. They feel like smoothness, not having to explain yourself twice, not having to personally deal with certain categories of problems, not having to go through the same systems everyone else does. That's what makes this level feel so different. At this level, money often stops buying better things and starts buying a different experience of reality. It's no longer just comfort. It's control over access, exposure, and how much of life you still have to face the hard way. And when you step back and look at all four levels together, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to ignore. On the surface, it might seem like this video was about groceries, cars, houses, flights, exclusivity, and lifestyle. But it wasn't really about that. What this video actually showed is that money doesn't just change what you can buy, it changes the kind of discomfort you're trying to silence. Today, we talked about the urgency the $1,000 level is trying to silence. We talked about the need to prove progress that shows up at the $10,000 level. We understood that at the $100,000 level, what money is trying to silence is friction, while at the $1 million level, it's trying to silence limitation. The feeling of still having to move through systems that no longer match the level of control you want to have over your own life. That's the deeper pattern hiding underneath all four levels. As wealth rises, money doesn't just get bigger, expectations rise with it. That's why the same amount of money can feel life-changing in one world and almost irrelevant in another. Because the number didn't change. The pressure behind it changed. The fear behind it changed. The problem it's being sent to solve changed. And once you see that clearly, something else becomes easier to understand too. A lot of spending that looks irrational from the outside isn't irrational inside the emotional reality of that level. Because people aren't just spending money. They're always trying to silence something. And once you realize that, the conversation stops being about rich versus poor and becomes something much more revealing. What exactly is money being asked to protect you from at each stage of life? I think that's the real question we should be asking ourselves. Because depending on where someone is in life, money can mean completely different things. And that's why money is never just about the numbers themselves. It's about the life around it and the role it's being asked to play within that reality. Before I wrap up this video, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these four levels do you think changes the way money feels the most? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed what you watched, make sure to leave a like and share this with someone who'd find this topic interesting too. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.